Just add me to your accounts, Dad. It's the responsible thing to do, my son said, sliding a power of attorney form across my kitchen table like he was doing me a favor. I looked at the form. Then I looked at him. Then I smiled and said, "You know what, son? You're absolutely right." He didn't know that I had already spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly this moment. My name is Gerald, and for 31 years I investigated insurance fraud for one of the largest carriers in the Southeast. I spent 3 decades watching people lie, manipulate, and construct elaborate schemes to take money that didn't belong to them. I learned how they think. I learned how they cover their tracks. I learned, most importantly, how to let them believe they were winning right up until the moment they weren't. I retired at 62. I bought a modest house in Asheville, North Carolina, with a wraparound porch and a view of the mountains that still makes me catch my breath every morning. I had my pension, my savings, and my health. I had a good dog named Copper who slept at the foot of my bed. I had neighbors who waved when they saw me. For the first time in my adult life, I had peace. What I didn't have, apparently, was enough suspicion about my own family. My son Derek was 34. He worked in sales for a medical device company, a good job, good income. He had married Melissa 6 years ago, and at the wedding I shook her father's hand and told him we were lucky to have her. I meant it at the time. Melissa was charming and polished, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and always brought the right bottle of wine to dinner. She called me Dad Gerald and squeezed my arm when she said it. For the first 2 years of their marriage, everything seemed fine. Derek and Melissa visited a few times a year. We had good holidays. I watched football with my son on Thanksgiving and felt grateful. Then things shifted. Slowly. So slowly that I almost missed it. It started small enough that I dismissed it the first few times. A charge on my visa for $67 at a home goods store I had never been to. Then $112 at a restaurant in Charlotte, 3 hours from my house, on a Tuesday afternoon when I was sitting on my own porch. I called the bank, assumed it was a data breach, and had the card replaced. The new card arrived. 2 weeks later, a charge for $340 at a furniture outlet. I am a man who spent 31 years looking for patterns in data, I noticed. But here is what I want you to understand, because this is the part that is hardest to explain. When the person draining your account is a stranger, your response is simple and immediate. You call the police, you file a report, you move on. When you begin to suspect it might be your own child, the boy you taught to ride a bike, whose little league games you never missed, who cried in your arms the night his grandfather died, you do not move fast. You move carefully, because you are hoping, with every piece of evidence, that you are wrong. I was not wrong. It took me 6 weeks and a conversation with my old colleague Raymond, who spent 28 years in the fraud division with me, to confirm what I had already suspected. Raymond had a contact at the bank who confirmed the pattern of access. Someone had obtained my account number and routing information. The charges were being made with a duplicate card, not a hacked card, not a skimmer. A card that had been requested through the bank's online portal, linked to my account, and mailed to an address in Charlotte. Derek and Melissa lived in Charlotte. I sat on my porch that evening with Copper's head in my lap and the mountains going pink in the late light, and I felt something I had not felt since the early years of my career, that specific hollowness that comes from confirming something you never wanted to know. I did not cry. I had cried already, privately, during those 6 weeks of hoping. Now I was done hoping. Now I was working. I called Raymond back. I told him what I needed. He told me what he could do. We had done this kind of work together for the better part of 3 decades, and we fell back into it the way you fall back into an old habit without thinking, because the muscle memory is still there. Raymond flagged the account for monitoring. Every transaction was now being logged with timestamps, IP addresses, and device information. I did not freeze the account. I did not cancel the duplicate card. I let it breathe, because a cornered person covers their tracks, but a comfortable person gets greedy. In fraud investigation, greed is your best ally. Over the next 4 weeks, I documented $4,200 in charges, groceries, gas, a weekend hotel stay in Savannah, dinners I was not at, a pair of boots from a boutique in the Nodia neighborhood of Charlotte. I have never worn boots from a boutique in my life. I am a New Balance man, and I make no apologies for it. I also hired a locksmith to change every lock in my house and installed a small camera above my kitchen door, disguised as a smoke detector. I had given Derek a spare key 2 years earlier, in case of emergency. I wanted to know if that key had ever been used when I wasn't home. It had, 3 times in 4 months, each time for less than 12 minutes. On the third visit, the camera showed Derek going directly to the small desk in my kitchen where I keep my files. He opened the second drawer, removed a folder, photographed several pages with his phone, and replaced it. The folder contained my account statements and the contact information for my financial advisor. That was the moment I stopped feeling sad and started feeling something closer to clarity. The power of attorney conversation happened on a Sunday in October. Derek and Melissa arrived for what they called a family check-in, which was a phrase Melissa had started using about a year ago. She brought a casserole and a smile. Derek brought the paperwork. The document was thorough. It would have given Derek full authority over my bank accounts, investment accounts, and property decisions in the event I became unable to manage my affairs. The language around inability was vague in the way that lawyers make language vague when vagueness serves their client. "You're not getting any younger, Dad," Derek said, and he said it gently. "The way you say something you've practiced saying. Melissa and I just want to make sure you're protected. What if something happened to you? We'd have no way to help." Melissa reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "We just love you and want to be there for you," she said. I looked at her hand on mine. I thought about the boots from the boutique. I thought about the hotel in Savannah. "You know what?" I said. "You're absolutely right. I should have done this sooner." Derek's face did something complicated relief, mixed with surprise, because some part of him had been braced for resistance. Melissa smiled the way someone smiles when a long con clicks into place. "I'll need a day or two to review the paperwork," I said, "and then I'll have my attorney look it over. Just a formality. You understand." "Of course," Melissa said quickly. Too quickly. "I'll also need to update a few things on my end first, just financial housekeeping. I've been meaning to get organized anyway." I smiled at her. "I want everything clean and in order before I sign anything." She smiled back. "That makes complete sense, Dad Gerald." I spent the next 10 days being very busy. First, I met with Raymond and a contact of his at the district attorney's office, a woman named Patricia Chen, who handled white-collar financial crimes and who had the particular gift of listening to a complicated story and immediately seeing exactly which laws had been broken. I laid out everything: the duplicate card, the transactions, the footage from my kitchen camera, the photographs Derek had taken of my financial documents. Patricia did not blink. She asked 3 clarifying questions. Then she told me what she needed from me to make the case solid, and I provided it before the week was out. Second, I met with my actual attorney, a man named Howard Briggs, who had handled my estate planning for 15 years. I told Howard everything. Howard, who is 71 and has seen most of what there is to see in a legal career, listened without interrupting, and then said, with great calm, "Gerald, let's make sure your estate is airtight before this shakes out." We spent 2 hours reworking my will, my beneficiary designations, and the structure of my accounts. When we were finished, Derek was no longer in any position to benefit from my death in the way he might have anticipated. Third, I worked with my bank to quietly close the compromised accounts and open new ones, while leaving the old accounts technically active with a minimal balance, just enough to keep the duplicate card functional and the transactions appearing normal. Patricia needed the evidence trail to continue a little longer. I gave her 10 more days. By the time Derek called to ask if I had reviewed the power of attorney paperwork, I had everything I needed. "Come over Sunday," I told him. "Bring Melissa. We'll have lunch and I'll sign the papers." There was a pause on the line. I could hear him exhale. "That's great, Dad," he said. "That's really great." "I'm looking forward to it," I said. And I meant that too, just not in the way he assumed. Sunday came in cold and clear, the mountains sharp against a blue sky. I made coffee and set the table and waited. Raymond was parked 2 streets over. Patricia had officers available if needed, though she and I had agreed that the most important thing was to let Derek and Melissa walk into the room with full confidence before anything shifted. They arrived at noon. Melissa hugged me at the door. Derek clapped me on the shoulder and called me Dad. They sat down at the kitchen table where, 6 weeks earlier, Derek had slid me those power of attorney papers. I served the coffee, We talked about the weather. We talked about the drive up from Charlotte. Melissa admired the light in the kitchen. Then I reached into the folder I had set on the counter and I placed a document on the table. It was not the power of attorney they had brought. It was a printed summary, 41 pages, prepared by Raymond and Patricia's office, documenting every unauthorized transaction made on my account over the previous 7 months. Every charge, every timestamp, every IP address, every GPS tag location where the card had been used, the hotel in Savannah, the boutique in Noda, the grocery runs, the gas stations, the restaurants, a total of $6,840. Below that document, I placed the still images from my kitchen camera. Derek at my desk. Derek opening my drawer. Derek photographing my files. I did not raise my voice. I have never needed to raise my voice in a professional setting, and I saw no reason to start at my own kitchen table. I spent 31 years catching people who did exactly this, I said. I want you to know that I did not enjoy doing it this time. The color left Derek's face in a way I will not forget. Melissa went very still, the stillness of someone calculating, not someone feeling. That told me something I had already suspected. This had been her architecture. Derek was not innocent, but he had been built into something by someone more practiced at it than he was. Dad, Derek started. I'm not finished, I said. I told him about Patricia. I told him that the district attorney's office had been informed and that criminal charges for financial elder abuse and identity theft were being filed. I told him that the accounts had been secured and that the power of attorney paperwork he had brought would never be signed by me, under any circumstances. I told him that my will had been updated and that Howard Briggs had copies of everything. Then I stopped talking, and I let the silence sit there. Melissa found her voice first. She said it was a misunderstanding. She said the card must have been used by someone else. She said I was confused, that this was exactly why they had wanted the power of attorney to protect me from situations like this where I might misinterpret things. I had investigated fraud for 31 years. I had heard every version of that speech. Melissa, I said, I have your device ID, your IP address, and GPS coordinates placing you at 11 of those transactions. I have Derek on camera in my house, accessing my financial documents on 3 separate occasions. I have a retired colleague with 28 years in fraud investigation who will testify to the integrity of this documentation. I would encourage you to speak with an attorney before you say anything else. She stopped talking. Derek put his elbows on the table and dropped his head into his hands. What happened next was not what I expected. I had prepared for anger. I had prepared for denial. I had prepared for the door to slam. What I had not prepared for was my son, 34 years old, built like his mother, with her same dark eyes beginning to cry at my kitchen table. Not the performance of crying, the real thing, the kind that costs something. I'm sorry, he said. It came out broken, the way that real apologies do. Dad, I'm so sorry, she said. He stopped. He looked at Melissa. Something moved across his face. She said you'd never notice. She said old people never check their statements. She said it was basically already going to be ours anyway. Melissa stood up from the table. Don't, she said. Her voice was flat and precise. She planned all of it, Derek said, and his voice was rising now, not at me, but at the realization he was apparently having in real time. The card, the power of attorney, that she said it would just be temporary, that we'd pay it back once we got ahead of the mortgage. Derek. Melissa's voice could have cut glass. Stop talking. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and I watched something happen in my son's face that I had not seen since he was 9 years old and had broken a neighbor's window with a baseball and come home to tell me about it himself, before anyone else could. I watched him decide to tell the truth even though it was going to cost him. He told me everything. It had started 18 months ago. They were behind on their mortgage, behind on 2 car payments, behind on credit cards that Melissa had maxed out furnishing a house they could not afford. Melissa had suggested the card scheme first just to get through a rough patch, Derek said, his voice hollow. Then the rough patch became 6 months. Then a year. Then Melissa started talking about the power of attorney, about eventually taking over my accounts entirely when I got older, about how it was only practical, only smart planning. She kept saying you were old, Derek said. She kept saying you weren't going to be sharp forever. She said people in their 60s start losing it, and nobody notices until it's too late. He looked at me. Dad, you investigated fraud for 30 years. I don't know what I was thinking. You were thinking what people think when they're scared and someone they trust is giving them a way out, I said. He flinched. Melissa left my house without another word. She did not say goodbye. She took her purse from the back of the chair and she walked out my front door and down my porch steps, and I heard her car start in the driveway, and then she was gone. I would later learn that she drove directly to her parents' house in Columbia and did not return to their home in Charlotte for 4 days, by which point she had retained an attorney. She was charged alongside Derek financial elder abuse, identity theft, fraudulent use of account information. The DA's office pursued both cases. Melissa ultimately accepted a plea arrangement that included restitution and probation. Derek, who had cooperated fully and whose documented role was demonstrably less than Melissa's, received probation, mandatory financial counseling, and full restitution requirements. He lost his job when the charges became public. He moved out of the house in Charlotte. He and Melissa were divorced 14 months later. I want to be clear about what I felt during all of that. People assume I must have felt satisfied. And there was a version of satisfaction, the professional satisfaction of a case that held together, of documentation that was clean, of justice that moved in the direction it was supposed to move. That part felt familiar. But watching my son's life come apart was not satisfying. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done, and I have sat across the table from a lot of difficult things in 64 years. The question I asked myself, in the months that followed, was whether I had made the right choice, whether I should have handled it quietly, privately, recovered the money through some other means, protected my son from the consequences of what he had let happen. And every time I asked it, I came back to the same answer. If I had covered it over, if I had absorbed the loss, signed the power of attorney, let Melissa have what she was engineering, my son would have learned that the people who love him will absorb whatever he allows to happen. He would have gone further. He would have let someone take him further, down a road that does not have a good end. I have seen where that road goes. I investigated it for 3 decades. Loving someone sometimes means refusing to be what their worst choices need you to be. Derek called me 8 months after the hearing. He had found work, less money, humbler hours, a company that did not know his name yet. He was living in a small apartment in Raleigh. He sounded, for the first time in years, like himself. Like the version of him that existed before Melissa, before the debt, before the scheme. Like the boy at the kitchen table who once told me about a broken window before anyone else could. We talked for a long time, he cried again. I let him. When he was finished, I told him what I had never stopped believing, even in the worst of it, that the man I raised was still in there, and that I had not done what I did to punish him, but to give him a chance to find his way back to that man. He asked if he could visit sometime. I told him the porch light would be on. This past Thanksgiving, Derek sat on my porch in Asheville and watched the mountains go gold in the afternoon light. Copper, who has no memory for grudges, put his head in my son's lap and sighed contentedly. We had turkey and bad football and coffee that I made too strong, the way I always make it. I looked at my son and I thought about what it cost both of us to be sitting there. It cost a lot. I won't minimize that. 31 years in fraud investigation teaches you that the financial numbers are almost never the real story. The real story is what the money represents, the fear, the entitlement, the love that got distorted somewhere along the line into something that could justify taking from a person who trusted you. But I also know this. The moment I refused to pretend I hadn't noticed was the moment I gave my son a chance to come back from where he was going. That was the hardest and most important thing I have ever done in a family that I love. Not the paperwork, not the documentation, not the 41 pages and the GPS coordinates. The hardest part was sitting at that kitchen table on a Sunday morning in October, handing my son evidence of what he had become, and trusting that somewhere underneath it was the person I had always known him to be. He did not let me down. If you are sitting somewhere right now wondering whether the person you love is taking advantage of your trust, I want to tell you something I learned the hard way. Your instincts are usually right, and doing nothing is not the same as being kind. Letting someone continue down a wrong road because you love them is not protection. It is something that looks like love and works like harm. Check your statements. Know your accounts. Pay attention to the small things. because the small things are always where it starts. And if you found value in this story, please leave a comment below. I read every single one. Tell me, what would you have done differently? Would you have gone to the authorities or handled it another way? I genuinely want to know. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. It might matter more than you think. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.